Thank you for being here this morning and for choosing to learn more about rain barrels and their maintenance. My name is Joyce Amato. I am the Public Education Manager for the Watershed Protection Program and your host for today's webinar. Next slide, please. It is my honor to introduce our panelists who are with us this morning. Vice President Aura Garcia with the Los Angeles Board of Public Works is here. Jesse Savou, founder and owner of BlueBarrel Rainwater Catchment Systems, will be our presenter for the day. Mitesh Patel, who is with the Los Angeles Low Impact Development Program, is here to answer any questions you may have regarding the LID program. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank the support team who is working behind the scenes to make sure that today's webinar runs smoothly. Next slide, please. Now it is my honor to welcome from the Los Angeles Board of Public Works, Vice President Aura Garcia.
Thank you, Joyce. Good morning to everyone. My name is Aura Garcia, and I am the Vice President for the Board of Public Works for the City of Los Angeles. And it is an honor and a pleasure to be here this morning. I wanted to take this time to welcome you all to such a nice and beautiful topic that you have going on today. And really thank you for your time and for your proactive approach to water conservation. Today, you will learn the many different ways you can contribute to helping our city be more sustainable. You will also learn how to maintain and care for a rain barrel and the different ways you can utilize the rainwater. And most importantly, once you have your rain barrel at home, you will not only help us at the city conserve water and be more sustainable and contribute to our plan, our long-lasting plan, or being more reserved with our waters, but you will also have rainwater in your home that will create many benefits to your lawn, to your garden, and to your plants. But also, and probably the most important thing that will happen once you have a rain barrel in your home is that you will see the savings in your water bill. And most of us really want to see that also. So thank you for taking your time today. Thank you for being a great resident of the city of Los Angeles that's here to really learn how to be more green, more resilient, and how to recycle what we have in our nature. So thank you today for being here. And once again, thank you, Joyce, Jesse, and everyone else that made today possible happen. And with that, I take it back to you, Joyce.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next slide, please. So here is our agenda for today's webinar. I will be going over a few webinar housekeeping items. Then I will turn it over to Jesse for our rain barrel maintenance presentation. After that, we will have a question and answer period. And then at the very end, we will be conducting a post-webinar survey. And we hope that you will all choose to stay until the very end and participate in that post-webinar survey. Next slide. We really encourage you to ask questions about rain barrels and their maintenance during today's presentation. And as I mentioned, we will have a question and answer period at the very end of our presentation. We will try to answer as many of your questions as possible live. So please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type in your question and then click send. You will have the option of choosing to send that question anonymously if you would like to do that. Please do note, however, that the chat feature, while it shows up on your screen, we will not be able to answer questions that are in the chat. So please use only the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And again, we will answer all of those questions after Jesse's presentation at the end. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that we do see a lot here at the City of Los Angeles's Watershed Protection Program is regarding residential rain barrel rebates. The Metropolitan Water District, through the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, does offer residential rebates for rain barrels. And so we encourage you to visit SoCalWatersmart.com to learn more about those residential rebates that are available to you. We know this morning there may be some folks who are attending who are not specifically residents of the city of Los Angeles, but live in the outlying cities. And we really would encourage you to check with your local water district to learn what rebates and opportunities are available to you through your local water district. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, we will be conducting a short 5-minute post-webinar survey. Please stay until the end of the presentation in order to take that survey. And we value your response because it helps us to improve future webinars and programming here at the Watershed Protection Program. We also will be conducting after the webinar, the City of Los Angeles residents who participated in our post-webinar survey will be entered into a random drawing to win one $25 Home Depot gift card. So we encourage you to stay until the very end of the webinar to take that survey. Next slide, please. So now it's my honor to introduce our presenter for this morning's webinar, Jesse Savou. Jesse is the founder and owner of BlueBarrelSystems.com, which is a California green business. She has a Master of Arts in Ecological Design and is an accredited professional with the American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association. She is certified with the American Society of Sanitary Engineers, and she has been doing this for a while. She has been harvesting rain for over a decade, since 2011. So with that, I will turn it over to Jesse.
Thank you very much, Joyce, and thanks to everyone who's here. It's wonderful to be with you online. And yes, this is a special year. I've been harvesting rain for 11 years myself, and BlueBarrel is 10 years old this year. So it's amazing how time flies and what one can learn over that period of time. So I'm excited to be here and be able to share some of this with you today. Next slide. So before we dive in, I actually want to hear from you. So it's going to help me tailor this presentation if I get a sense of how many of you are already harvesting rain. So in a moment, you'll see a survey pop up on your screen, and we'll give you a few minutes to answer. It's just yes or no. Do you have a rain barrel? And I'd actually like you to answer yes, even if you have a larger tank that you consider to be a cistern, or you may have many rain barrels. Please answer yes if you are already harvesting rainwater, and otherwise, please answer no. And I think as soon as about 90% of the people answer the question, we will all get to see the results. So we'll just give that a minute. Okay, so about 64% of those who answered are already harvesting and 36% not. And this is great news. We're focusing on maintenance today, so this will be really useful for those of you who are already harvesting. But we made an effort to take an approach to make this very informative for people who are here to get inspired to start harvesting. So we hope this will be useful for all of you. Next slide. Maintenance issues. So this is a question for those of you who answered yes to the first question. What maintenance issues have you experienced, if any? And you can check any of these issues you've experienced. Check as many boxes as you want. So algae would be green, cloudy stuff appearing in your barrels. Particulate buildup and blockages, that's just a big word for any other stuff that might be in your barrel, stuff that's clouding your water or possibly even creating enough of a problem to block the flow. Discolored or smelly water, mosquitoes. If you see mosquitoes kind of hanging out near your barrels, we want to know about that. Overflow pooling issues, meaning is the water kind of getting to where it shouldn't be and pooling on your property. Failing parts would include cracks or leaks or any other parts that might need to be replaced. And if you click other, please use the Q&A to tell us what other maintenance issues you might have experienced. And of course, there's a box for none, because I hope to convince you by the end of this presentation that a well-designed rain barrel can be a very low maintenance system. So there may be those of you who are harvesting successfully with no maintenance issues to date. So we'll give you a minute with this one as well. Okay, so we have a few folks who've experienced algae and particulate buildup, discolored or smelly water. So about 20 to 25% of people are experiencing these issues. Mosquitoes, overflow and pooling and failing parts. So that's a pretty even distribution of issues. It looks like we're between 20 and 26% on all of those. And we do have a couple of others. And I'm actually happy to see that a full 24% have experienced no issues. And if you said other, feel free to put in the chat what that is, as we may be able to address other issues. And Joyce could let me know if anything appears that's a big ticket item. All right, next slide. So before we dive in on maintenance, we're going to zoom way out to give us a little context about why we're doing this at all. So I'm going to bring you here to this place, which is planet Earth. And this is the global hydrologic cycle, also known as the water cycle. And this is a graphic you may remember from about the 4th grade, but I find that it helps to review to get us all on the same page about why we're doing this. So worldwide, water condenses into clouds and then creates precipitation. So in Los Angeles, that's usually going to look like rain. Last I checked, there's not a lot of snow in LA, although maybe in the mountains above LA. And then that water runs off the surface of the land into lakes, streams, rivers, makes its way back to the ocean. And then very importantly, a lot of that water actually infiltrates into the ground. So you see that arrow underground showing water recharging groundwater, and that water also gets to the ocean and it creates the base level for flowing streams and rivers as well. Groundwater is very important. So water sits in storage for a long time. And in this case, when I say storage, I mean the ocean or lakes. And then this whole cycle is powered by the sun. That water evaporates again and starts the whole thing over. Now, this has been happening since the beginning of time. And the truth is we don't have any less water on our planet than we ever did. So I like to start here because that can be an aha for folks who live in really drought-prone areas like we live in. Why is drought an issue then if we don't have any less water than we ever did? So I hope the next slide will help to clarify that a little bit. This is a graphic that I created in my grad school ecological design program, and I've been using it ever since. What this is showing us on the left is what water does in a natural environment versus what it does in a developed landscape. So on the left, and I want to make it clear that a natural environment, we could be talking about a lush rainforest, a very dry desert, or anything in between. Maybe a chaparral is what you would see in Los Angeles if the city had never been built. In any of these landscapes, water is going to escape in the same proportions. So about 40% of the water that falls in nature evapotranspirates. Now that's a really big word that encompasses the evaporation, the water kind of rising straight up again into the sky, and then also the water that transpirates through trees, plants, and other living things on the surface of the earth. A full 50% of the water that falls in nature is going to infiltrate into the ground. So you see those two arrows, 25% is shallow infiltration and 25% is deep infiltration, recharging that really important bank of water that we keep underground. And then that smaller arrow that you see above the surface represents 10% runoff. So runoff is a part of the water cycle in nature, but it's really a very small amount. And you can kind of picture that if it were raining in a forest, not a lot of water is going to be sheeting off the surface. It's going to be really getting back into that sponge that is the ground underneath. So let's compare that to a developed landscape. And here we're assuming 75% impervious ground cover. So that's another big word. And what that really means is any surface that the water can't get through. So your roof, the roads, your driveway, parking lots, anything like that that's blocking the infiltration link in the cycle. So in a developed landscape, we have down to 30% evapotranspiration. So compare that to 40%. That's a 25% in reduction of the clouds that are actually created in a developed landscape. But the infiltration is the one that I really want folks to focus on today. So in this developed landscape, we have only 10% shallow infiltration, 5% deep infiltration, and a whopping 55% runoff. So I hope this graphic makes it clear that what we do when we pave over our environments is basically flip the infiltration and the runoff so that we're sending water away. We're telling the water, get on out of here as fast as you can. And what rainwater harvesting is about, next slide, is mitigating that. So for every bit of hardscape, and that's another word for the paved surfaces and roofs, we want to be capturing water that's sheeting off of those surfaces so that we can get it back into the ground, back into the soils, to lush up our environment and create food and soils that are really alive and feeding us and sustaining our environment. So that's what you see here. This is a very simplified graphic of the water cycle, but here you see a rooftop there with a water storage system that's actually a real on-site mitigation for the water that's not sinking into the ground because the house is there. Next slide. All right, so I brought you to planet Earth, and now I want to take you right here to LA. This is called a place-based assessment, and you may be glazing over with all these numbers here, but I'll break this down for you. So the input data, all you need to know, the point of this exercise is basically to understand how much rain falls in a community, and what kind of budget does that give us to work with in terms of the water we have to irrigate with. So all you need to know is the population of an area, the land area, and some figure for average annual rainfall. So we have about almost 4 million people living in the city of Los Angeles with a land area just over 500 square miles, and annual average rainfall, 30-year average, of 14.25 inches. So we're going to do a whole bunch of unit conversion, which I already did, so I'm not going to go over that, but we can translate that into how much rain do we get per person per day on average? And the answer is 87 gallons. So in parentheses, that GPCD stands for gallons per capita per day. If you like to read water reports, you'll see that as a measure, but otherwise all it means is that's how much water comes in the form of rain. So this is not the water that we're piping in from up north, and it's not the water we're drawing in from underground. So the thing that blows people's minds, and I hope you can remember this, is that actual use, and this is a recent figure from the Water Resources Control Board, in the city of Los Angeles, 75 gallons per person per day. So just think about that for a minute. We actually get more rainfall on average than people use in residential settings, and that includes indoor and outdoor. So if we think about rainwater harvesting as a great source of irrigation water, and here in California, most residential use does go to the landscape, you start to see it as an actual realistic way to solve a problem of water shortages. Next slide. So here's another set of numbers and I tried to keep them very round numbers, because my goal is for you to walk away with information that you can share with others. I think there's a big myth in California that it's so dry here, we don't really have enough rain to harvest. And the truth is, I hope the last slide helped to demonstrate, and this slide as well, that couldn't be farther from the truth. So a single inch of rain falling on a 1,000 square foot rooftop surface generates over 600 gallons of high quality irrigation water. Many people live in homes that are larger than 1,000, so you can multiply up from there. And of course, we get much more than the single inch of rain. So you start to see that even that 1 inch of rain on a small rooftop surface will fill 11 standard rain barrels. Okay, so many of you are already harvesting, and this is not news to you. You've seen how quickly those barrels fill. But for those who are still thinking about it, I hope to help people understand that you can share with your neighbors too that rainwater harvesting is a really valuable strategy to be using in your garden. Next slide. Okay, so before we're still in intro mode here, I want to give people as much context as possible. There are different ways to harvest rainwater, and the whole point here is to slow it, spread it, sink it, and store it. So that's a mantra you can remember. That's as opposed to pump it, pipe it, pollute it. So again, our environment, most of our urban environments were designed to get water out as quickly as possible. And now we're trying to reverse that thinking and allow our earth to act more the way that it does in nature. So again, roofs and pavements stop infiltration, interrupting the water cycle and sending water away. But what I hope to have shown on the last couple of slides is that water is plentiful if we retain it. So infiltrating it into the ground is called passive harvesting, and that's what you see in this picture. Believe it or not, this is a rainwater catchment system of sorts. It's called a passive system. You may have heard words like infiltration basin, swale, rain garden, bioswale. All of these are different words for basically the idea is you're shaping the earth so that you're inviting the water back in. So this person has created a dry creek that gives the water a place to be, and it's sloping down from both sides so that water is invited to stay on the property and recharge the groundwater underneath. Often these are designed with rocky beds, and that just helps. You don't want to create an open ditch where you're going to start having mosquito problems, but the rocks really give the water a place to go, and these can be designed very beautifully, and they can be vegetated as well. But our focus today is on active harvesting, and what active harvesting means is simply you're storing the water in tanks or barrels, allowing for beneficial use. So the big difference is you get to decide now how you want to use the water if you're storing it in barrels. Next slide. So as a brief overview, I want to go over the anatomy of an active rainwater catchment system. Conveyance is the techie term for simply your gutters and downspouts. So this is the system the drainage system that's going to get the water into your barrels. Gutters are the horizontal piece that go along your roof line. And downspouts are the vertical piece that you see here in this picture that bring that water down to the ground. Now, sometimes they release onto the ground, and sometimes, as you see in this picture, they go underground and connect to an underground drainage system. But in any case, usually that water is designed to leave your property. And what we're going to do is intercept that water and keep that water on site because it's very high quality irrigation water. So any active system is going to have an inlet with a filter, and the inlet is that black piece you see connecting the downspout to the barrel. And I have slides later on to show more detail about how that piece works. You will need the storage, quite obviously. So that's your barrel, tank, or cistern. Outlets, you can have more than one. So what you see here is fairly typical, where you have a spigot about 6 to 12 inches off the ground that you can fill buckets from. And then this barrel has a ground level drain where you can drain the rest of that water. And we hope that hose is going into a vegetated area where it can be beneficial to the plants. Overflow, very important. So even if you think it's really dry here and your barrel's not going to fill, it is, and you need to have a strategy for managing the overflow. In this system, that inlet hose is also the overflow, and I will explain how that works later on. Vents are very important. So if the air can't get out, the water can't get in. So we don't see the vent on this system. It would be under that beautiful mess of flowers on top of it. But there's going to be air getting out as the water goes in. And then foundation I put in parentheses because it's not a core part of the system anatomy, but a full rain barrel can weigh up to almost 500 pounds. These smaller 55-gallon rain barrels can weigh almost 500 pounds when they're full. So you want to make sure they're installed on a stable surface. Next slide. All right, so here's actually a very similar, it's the same anatomy you see here, but this example shows more of maybe a DIY approach where you're using a used barrel that you've recycled from the waste stream. But one of the thesis statements of this whole presentation is that a well-designed rain barrel is a well-maintained rain barrel. So those of you who reported the 25% that aren't having any issues with their rain barrels yet have probably done a pretty good job with all these features. So you want to be sure to be using an opaque UV resistant storage container. And I'm going to go through these quickly because we have slides later on that break down each of these components. A closed design, meaning you want to make sure nothing is able to get in. So this barrel is completely closed, and that's a benefit. And we'll also show you strategies to work with barrels that may have an open top that you're going to be screening. And that leads me to the next point. 1/16 inch screening on all openings is extremely important. And I'll just leave that as a cliffhanger now because we'll get into much more detail on that later on. Proper overflow handling. The overflow must be equal to or greater in size than all of the inlets. And I say all of the inlets because many of you may be harvesting in multi-barrel systems and you'll have maybe an inlet feeding either side. Your overflow needs to handle the size of all of the inlets. Protected from sunlight is very important. And then do not drink. So again, the assumption here is that we're working with non-potable systems. People do harvest for potable use, and it's a wonderful thing to do, but it's a different league. It requires a lot of treatment and permitting. You can't drink water straight off your roof for pretty obvious reasons. So I'm surprised a lot of these photos don't show the do not drink sticker, but we'll show you what that looks like. You're required to have a do not drink sticker next to every spigot or outlet, and you will see that later in the presentation. All right, next slide. So, believe it or not, if you've followed those design principles, this is a standard maintenance schedule, and it really is this simple. So I'll go through it with you. And this comes from ARCSA, which stands for American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association. Sweep gutters out every 3 months or as needed. So really the most important thing is making sure that you don't have a lot of leaf litter or accumulation in your gutters that's going to be conveyed down into your barrel. So I do this in California. I think the most important time to do this is before the first rain in the fall. You've had all summer for stuff to be falling on your roof, or anytime you notice that there's buildup in your gutters would be a good time to go clean the gutters. Inspect and clean filters and screens, replace if necessary. And again, they're recommending every 3 months. But I'm going to show you in this presentation ways to set things up where you can kind of be keeping filters clean continually. It's a real simple thing. It's just a matter of knocking leaf buildup off as you see it accumulating so that the water can keep flowing without buildup. Inspecting valves and checking for micro leaks. And they're saying every 12 months here. I find that the most important time to check for leaks is right after you install a system because you want to just make sure everything's tightened down the way it should be. And it's pretty rare for a leak to appear after, if you've done that initial leak test, I wouldn't expect leaks to just start popping up. But a system could get knocked around, or depending on the quality of the parts you're using, they could break down over the years. So if you find that parts are breaking down, you want to address that. Now, here's the part I like the most about this maintenance schedule. Clean barrels, only if water quality declines. Okay, so in my time rainwater harvesting, which is about a decade now, this recommendation has actually changed. And I love telling this story. So it used to be part of the standard maintenance schedule that you would scrub out a rain barrel once a year. And that seems to make common sense, right? Well, it turns out ARCSA actually studied this, and they partner with the ag departments at University of North Carolina, University of Texas, and a couple of other major research universities to study all kinds of elements of rainwater harvesting. But about 8 years ago, they actually studied water quality in rain barrels and found that water is cleaner when you don't scrub the barrels out. So again, I'm going to leave this as a cliffhanger to keep you with me because I'm going to explain exactly why, because this is the big mystery. How could a non-scrubbed rain barrel possibly be cleaner or give you cleaner water anyway than a scrubbed rain barrel? All right, next slide. Okay, but what if? We've just gone over how to design the perfect rain barrel. That's not going to give you any maintenance issues, but let's come back to reality because some people may be experiencing issues like this. So, and we know from the survey, about 25% of those of you who are already harvesting are seeing at least one of these issues. So smelly or discolored water, mosquitoes, failing parts, algae, debris buildup. So we're going to help you with all of these issues. And just notice before we move on from this slide, some of the features we've already gone over, the screening, the UV resistant tanks, and the closed design, you can see that some of these systems we're looking at don't follow those principles, and we start to see the problems. So let's move on and get on to solutions. Okay, so here for the rest of the presentation, we're going to break down each of these specific measures you can do, because if you installed your rain barrel before you really had your head around these principles, there are definitely things you can do to address that, and we want to be able to help you with that today. So UV resistance is extremely important. Now, what this is going to help you with the most is algae. Algae needs sunlight to grow, and the reverse is also true. If you can preclude sunlight 100%, you will not have algae 100%. Okay, so it's that simple. So what this person has done is painted their barrels. I want to point out, you can see that this person actually started with a blue barrel. So I'm going to go ahead and guess, if you have a prefab rain barrel, it should be a UV resistant container. But many people have done DIY systems, which is a great thing to do. And it's wonderful to repurpose these food grade containers. That's what these are, for rain barrels. The blue ones, just so you know, are industry standard it means they're made out of food grade plastic, and they are UV resistant, and they have a thick barrel wall. This is the industry standard for food shipping containers. So I always recommend starting with a blue one, even if you're going to paint it, because if you start, they are out there in white or clear or transparent. Those ones are not going to be UV resistant, and you have to paint those. So if you want white barrels, what I recommend is starting with the blue and then painting them, and that gives you extra protection. If you have started with a white or a clear barrel, you have to paint it to create that UV resistance. All right, next slide. So painting is simple, and we're not going to get into huge detail today on that, but what you want to do if you're going to paint barrels is sand the surface for good adhesion. That just means it's going to help the paint stick. And you're going to want to get an outdoor rated spray paint for plastic, and that can be found at a hardware store. And if you read the outside, it should tell you if it's meant for outdoor use. It can take a lot of paint, up to 2 cans per barrel, to get that good coat, but that's what you're going to want if you're not starting with UV resistant containers. Getting creative, there's no limit. You can do decorative designs, so we just put these images in here to get you inspired if you're feeling artsy and want to do something of that nature. All right, next slide. All right, so the next issue we want to help you with is particulates. So again, other stuff, not necessarily algae, but maybe leaf litter or little bits of stuff that's getting into your water, and mosquitoes. So 16th inch mesh, to put that in, just to give you a visual, is window screen. That's what 16th inch mesh looks like. And a lot of the products you can buy that are meant for screening rainwater are already that standard, and they'd be made out of stainless steel, which is really what you want for a robust system. So here's an example of a DIY, it's a mesh cover. So this is an open barrel, but you see they are using mesh, and you can see that mesh is doing its job. It's keeping those leaves from getting into the barrel. Now, this person should probably sweep those leaves off because over time they can rot down, and then the stuff, those particulates are still getting down into the barrel. So, but this slide does a good job kind of showing you how that keeps things out. And then I want to emphasize too that mosquitoes are also prevented. So it was actually the mosquito and vector control folks that got the 16th inch mesh requirement into the code for rainwater harvesting, because that same 16th inch mesh is going to keep anything large enough out so that you won't have breeding going on in your barrels. Quick caution before I move on from this slide. We don't see enough of this rain barrel to see if it has an overflow on it. That would be below the level of that lip. But my caution here with this design, you see that lip on the top. If the water level is allowed to rise above the mesh, you could, again, have mosquito problems. So you want to make sure that overflow is letting water exit before it rises into that lip. And then the other caution is you see how much sunlight is on this barrel. So because this is an open design, that mesh is doing a great job keeping the particulates and mosquitoes out, but it's not keeping the sunlight out. So this barrel, if it really is exposed to that much sunlight or any sunlight at all, probably will need to be cleaned out for algae. All right, next slide.
Jesse, if I could just pop in here to give you a time check. We are at 11:05.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So this is a piece I really love. This is called a leaf eater, and this does have that 16th inch mesh. And I think we'll just play it as a video. This is an almost silent video. I'll keep my narration to a minimum so you can hear that kind of lovely sound of the water actually getting into barrels, and you can get a real visual of how this works. So let's go ahead and play that. Okay, and if you saw that thumbnail that popped up, BlueBarrel has a YouTube channel with all kinds of free how-to videos and little snips like that. There's another video that actually shows that leaf eater just completely loaded with stuff on gutter cleaning day. So that leaf eater really can keep major stuff, including those gravelly bits. A lot of people ask about the gravel that's on asphalt roofs. The leaf eater will completely keep those out of your system. So again, particulates, mosquitoes, for all those reasons, you want to be using some robust filter. Okay, next slide. All right, overflow handling. So I want to talk a little bit more about that downspout diverter. This is called a FlexiFit diverter, and it's my favorite for DIY systems. It does not require that you cut your downspout. You actually just drill a hole in the downspout, and it has a rubberized head that just inserts, and it seals around the inside of that downspout and delivers the water into your barrels. Now, what we're looking at here is the most common size. It fits a standard 2x3 downspout, which is the most typical size you'd see in a residential setting. Although these diverters do come in a 3x4 size, and they also come in a round version. And when I present live, I like to pass one of these around the room, and then I just wait for the question, what about that big hole in the middle? Isn't all the water getting by that hole? Well, let me explain, because that's actually a really key feature for how this piece handles overflow. So the first thing I want to remind people of, or maybe surprise you about, water doesn't actually free fall in a downspout. Because of the surface tension, water hugs the inside of the downspout as it exits. So most of the water, when it rains, is going to be delivered into that black reservoir around the perimeter of the piece and straight into your barrels. Now on the right, you see what it looks like when it's installed, and that hose, the inlet hose, needs to be pretty much level, because what happens is when the barrels fill all the way, any excess water is going to be pushed back up the hose. It's going to start rising in the downspout, and it's going to fall through that hole in the middle. So what this piece does is it completely avoids any overflow or pooling issues. So it will allow you to install a rain barrel without creating any new drainage issues. Now, I always emphasize for people, if you have drainage issues to start with, it won't fix them. I mean, it will take the pressure off them, because you're going to take a lot of that water off into a rain barrel system. But it won't create any new drainage issues. So the overflow water is going to exit the downspout as it would have if your rain barrel were not there. In this picture on the right, you can also see what that looks like installed with the leaf eater, which just goes right upstream. All right, next slide. Leaf eaters are cool. We get a lot of questions about, well, what do I do if I don't have standard downspouts? A leaf eater can be used to adapt to any standard size. So some of you may have rain chains, scuppers, or other kinds of drainage systems. Water just free falls onto the leaf eater, and then that leaf eater actually has an adapter on the bottom that will adapt to a standard downspout where you can do the rest of your connection from there. So this is a really, really versatile and valuable piece. Next slide. All right, we'll play another quick video, and I apologize for the abrupt start and finish to this video. It's a longer video, and we didn't want to make you sit through the whole thing. But I do want to show you the key of this. I'm just trying to make the point of how easy it is to install the leaf eater and give you a real visual of what it looks like as you install it. So let's go ahead and play.
December in California, so garden looks scraggly, but it's a good time to be doing infrastructure projects. We installed this 2-barrel system. Took a couple hours this morning, and now we're almost ready to go. We started with regular old downspout, and the downspout diverter is connected and ready to collect rain into these barrels. But what I want to show you today is actually how to install a leaf feeder. It's a very easy thing to do. Now the system works. The system is complete without a leaf feeder. We've already cut our downspout there, so just ignore that for a moment. But the water comes down the downspout, through the diverter, and into the barrels. And that's really all you need. However, it's great to have this extra layer. This is a really robust pre-filter, and it's also a great way to adapt from whatever you have going on up here to a compatible downspout if a diverter isn't compatible with what you have going on below. So let me keep going and I'll show you exactly what I mean. I'm just gonna pull the diverter out, and I'll show you that in more detail in just a minute here. So installing a leaf feeder is as simple as cutting your downspout. Now you can do that with a grinder, or you can even do it by hand with a hacksaw. And what's great about the leaf feeder, it's just gonna go here. Now water free falls onto the leaf feeder screen, and it's gonna catch any leaves, debris, those little gravelly bits that you have coming off your downspout. All of that is gonna catch here, and this is really easy to service. I'll show you how to do that once it's installed. Some people intuitively wanna put these way up here by the downspout drop. I recommend installing them at eye level, because you can pop off that screen every time you walk by if you need to, and you just kind of shake off the screen, pop it back into place, okay? And in terms of exactly the measurements, where to cut, it's not very sensitive. The water is just gonna free fall onto the leaf feeder. So we just made a cut there, and we're gonna go from there. So installing the leaf feeder is as simple as a screw. Okay, and before I get it all the way in, actually, I want to show you how well this piece adapts. So the leaf feeder comes with an adapter on the bottom. I'll pull it off. We have a 2x3 downspout, and that's really standard for a residential scale. And it's gonna secure right in there to the leaf feeder, okay? If you're working with a larger downspout, a 3x.
Okay, so again, apologies for that abrupt ending, but we wanted to show you just the parts of that that are really key for understanding how this piece works, and make you comfortable that maybe this is something you could actually do at home. Next slide, please. Okay, shade. So one of the simplest things, but I don't want to understate the importance of shade. It's just going to help keep everything cool. Any protection from the elements is going to help parts last longer, minimize growth, regularize the temperature, and prolong the life of all your parts. So think about spaces like under decks and stairs if you have that kind of setup. Plants and trellises can provide shade. Now I want to emphasize that photo in the middle. Again, you do see that nice 16th inch screen that's going to keep all the stuff out, but that's not keeping the sunlight out. So if you're using an open design, you need to keep your system 100% shaded. If you have a closed design, like the blue ones you see on either side, it's a little less sensitive and it will tolerate some sunlight, but as a general principle, it's always best to install in a narrow, shady side yard. So on the right, you can see that's a side yard, and those barrels will obviously get sunlight at some point. But I love this picture because it just shows how shady those side yard corridors can be. And then if here in the northern hemisphere, the north side of your house is always going to be the shadiest house. So a lot of folks might be thinking, well, I'm limited to where my downspouts actually are, or I want my barrels near my garden. Of course. So if your only kind of spot to put a rain barrel or a rainwater catchment system is in a very sunny spot, there are so many ways to create shade, and you can beautify it at the same time. You can put up a trellis, bring big old potted citrus plants around the tree, and around the rain barrels. Anything like that can help create shade. You can put up a shade cloth, but that's something that's definitely worth your while and will help with all of these issues. Next slide.
And Jesse, we are quick time check. We are at 11:15.
Great. Okay, I think we're right on track here.
Thank you.
Strapping. So we have a lot of folks ask about strapping, and the truth is it's not required. It is required if you're using a tank that is more than twice as high as it is wide. So that's what that first bullet means. The height, if the height to width ratio exceeds 2:1, you do need to strap them. But I believe in Los Angeles, there's another standard that says you shouldn't be installing tanks more than 1.5 times as tall as wide, regardless. And the truth is they really do bear down with the weight of the water, and you shouldn't need to strap them. But it's not, this system's installed in an elementary school, and they wanted to strap it for extra safety. So if you are going to strap them, I recommend using a nylon ratchet strap. They're available at automotive stores, and nylon is really thick. And it's not going to corrode the side of the barrel. So if you go online, you're going to see a lot of examples of people who have used what's called plumber's tape to strap barrels. It's a very thin metal strap with holes in it. I don't recommend that, especially for plastic tanks, because over time, the metal will eat away at the plastic. And I do believe the nylon ratchet straps are much stronger anyway. This picture, because it's a school, the school didn't want them interfacing with the building, so they sunk bollards to connect that. But what most people would do if you choose to strap your barrels is connect them to the building studs with the same kind of brackets you would use to put an outdoor water heater, for example. All right, next slide. Leaks and holes. I just want to talk about a few fittings. So if you've done a DIY rain barrel and you find that you're getting a little bit of water escaping around your spigot or valve, I like these. On the left, what you see is called a threaded insert tap seal. It's a rubberized piece. And this is opposed to, many of you may be aware of what's called bulkhead fittings, and those are a 2-part fitting where you actually have to get inside the barrel and you screw it in from both sides. First of all, most bulkhead fittings, I believe, aren't rubberized, which means they don't flex with the contour of the barrel. And if you have a closed design, it's going to be real tough to install one of those. So I love the tap seals. They're very inexpensive, and you just insert them from the outside. They're rubberized. They have standard threads in them. So when you do screw in your tap, it helps that rubber expand into the hole. So even if you have a few tiny little nicks in your hole, that should seal any leaks. And then if you need to plug a hole all together, these expandable twist plugs are great. They're tapered so that they're kind of flexible on what size you use. And then you screw that wing nut to help it expand again into any imperfections in the hole. So that's one way to address leaks. Next slide. All right, so back to this gentle scrub out idea. So if you do have algae and particulates, I hope we've given you some strategies how to prevent that in the future, but if you have some now that you need to deal with, you are going to want to empty your barrel and scrub it out. And it's a simple thing to do. Empty it while the walls are wet, use a soft brush and a gentle detergent, and scrub to your satisfaction. So, and detergent would be optional. It just kind of depends what you're dealing with and how clean you want that barrel to be. I think the most important thing here is that you use a soft brush. A wire brush or any harder brush could actually start to scratch the plastic, and you don't want that. But before we move on from this, I'm going to get back to that kind of cool fun factoid that water can stay cleaner in a rain barrel. And again, this is not water that you're drinking, so it's for the purposes of irrigation. If you don't scrub it out. So if your system is all closed up, UV resistant, properly screened in the shade, you shouldn't expect any problems with buildup or algae. You would get what's called a biofilm, which is a very thin layer. If you were to open that barrel up and scrape the inside, it might be a very dark color, but it would be a thin kind of layer that's created inside your barrels, and that actually attracts the particulates to it, and it creates a lot of what's entering your barrels is actually organic matter that breaks down, and the biofilm creates a light composting action in your barrel so that when you irrigate, it's like a light application of fertilizer every time. So that's why I say learn to love your biofilm. Don't think of it as something you need to scrub out. It's actually very alive water to be irrigating with. And I've presented before on the quality of why rainwater is so high quality for irrigation. We don't have time to get into those details today, but your garden will be very happy with rainwater. It's the right pH. It's got that nice little bit of organic matter in it, and it's the water that was meant to irrigate all kinds of plants. So next slide. Shock chlorination treatment. So again, both the scrub out and a shock chlorination treatment, you shouldn't expect to do it on any regular schedule. It's only if you really have a problem that you feel you need to deal with. So what do you do if you have a closed system that you can't get into and your water is for some reason really smelly or really discolored and you need to deal with it? You can do a shock chlorination treatment, and that's pretty simple. If you have 55-gallon barrels, you want to use about 2 tablespoons of chlorine bleach, maximum of a 1/4 cup if the water's really nasty, per barrel, and then gently agitate the barrels to mix. And then you want to wait at least 24 hours, but you'll really know that water is safe to apply to the landscape when you don't smell the bleach anymore. In 10 years of harvesting rainwater and helping people with literally thousands of barrels all across the nation, I've only ever had to do this once. So I don't want to make you feel like this is something you have to plan to do, but now you know how to do it should you need to. All right, next slide. All right, so we're about ready to wrap up here, but putting it all together, here is a Southern California home, someone who's done a really great job with all of these principles, and I'll just point out some of the things we talked about. So he's using closed drums that are UV resistant, and again, these actually are blue barrels that this person has painted to match the house, and they appear to be in shade, at least at this time of day, although for him it won't be quite as sensitive if they get some sun because he is using the closed barrels and they're UV resistant. He's actually drawing from 2 downspouts, one on either side, and we can't see the diverters in this picture, but you do see those leaf eaters, and those FlexiFit diverters are ensuring that the overflow is exiting at the right rate so that he's not going to have backup or pooling. Those little black pieces on top of each barrel are the vents. They are screened. Every vent has to be screened with that 16th inch mesh. Absolutely every opening, no exceptions. And here we do see that tiny little do not drink sticker, and he actually has another one around the corner. So with this system, he has a spigot off the left-hand side for filling buckets. And then if you can see it under that do not drink sticker, he has the drain valve where he can connect a gravity-fed drip irrigation system. And that's, again, gravity-fed drip is a topic I'd love to talk to folks about more because it's a really cool way to get the most out of your rain barrel system. But maybe we'll save that for another day. And then all the plumbing and the parts are concealed underneath, so they're not getting sunlight. So again, I hope this helps to kind of tie together and how we implement all of these good design practices that are going to help ensure a low maintenance system. All right, next slide. So I think that wraps up the presentation, and I think I'll turn it back over to Joyce, who's going to field some questions that I'd love to answer.
Thank you, Jesse. And yes, we actually do have a number of questions. So we're going to go ahead and dive into our question and answer period. And we will do our best to answer as many of these questions that are in the Q&A live. So the first, I wanted to just address or make you aware, Jesse, of what was in the others portion of the poll and see if you wanted to address any of those issues. So some of the other issues that were brought up was buildup dust and silt on the bottom of the barrel, low flow output from the spigot, how to deal with that. Denise specifically mentions that there was a crack on the seam of her barrel and all the water slowly leaked out, so she had to replace the whole thing. And then another participant mentioned that there was not enough water pressure because of the barrels not being set high enough. So I don't know if you want to address any of those.
Absolutely. And Joyce, if you wouldn't mind, I could briefly address all of those. Could you feed them to me again? Because
Sure.
I can't hold all 4 in my mind at the same time.
Absolutely. So the first one was about the buildup of dust and silt on the bottom of the barrel, which created low flow output.
Okay, so the buildup of dust and silt is going to happen if you have that spigot that's 6 to 12 inches off the top. You're going to be trapping water underneath that you can't access. So you are going to want to have a ground level drain valve where you could release that. And if you have years worth of buildup there that's actually inhibiting the flow, you might want to stop and empty your barrel and scrub it out. So you notice that the design for many of those multi-barrel system is actually a bottom draining design, which eliminates that problem altogether. So that's how I'd answer that question. What was the next one?
The next one was regarding a crack on the seam of the barrel.
Okay.
And
And then low flow as well.
right,
Low flow, I'll point out, I'm holding, this is called a high flow drain valve. So they do make now high flow drain valves and spigots specifically for rain barrels. And so, it's just a ball valve. You can see through it, and you'll notice as I hold this up to the screen that you get the full 3/4 inch exit there. Many standard spigots have what's called a gate valve. And first of all, those are more leak prone, but they don't open all the way. So you get some constriction coming out. So I do recommend, and it's the same hose thread, so it should be an easy thing to replace. And these are not expensive. So if you have a valve that's not giving you good output, you simply unscrew it and replace it with a high flow drain valve, high flow spigot. These come in the elbow shape too, if you needed more of a spigot feature. And then the cracks in the barrels. So we don't have time for personal consults today, but I'm going to go ahead and guess that maybe that barrel was not UV resistant. Or it was exposed to too much sunlight for what it was. Many DIY systems, I've seen people try to do them with those square totes that are usually clear, and any square shape is going to be more vulnerable to cracking on the corners. So I'm guessing about what may have actually been the problem in your case, but a properly designed rain barrel is going to have those blue barrels if you're doing DIY, or hopefully any prefab barrel that you would buy would have at least a 1/4 inch, or well, technically it would be 3/16, but let's say a 1/4 inch thick walls. You shouldn't expect really any cracking at all if you have a barrel of the appropriate thickness and UV resistance.
okay, great. Thank you, Jesse. The next few questions are regarding rain barrel draining and the distribution of water. One participant writes, I don't see how the rain barrels are helpful when we have to release the water within 3 days. It feels like it's just a temporary storage holder for a few days, and not sure how that's helpful. And then Margaret also mentions that she's not using up the water each year and wondering if her rain barrels should be completely drained annually. So maybe you want to address just how long we can actually hold the water in rain barrels, go over that
Sure.
again, and then if they should be drained annually.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not aware of anyone who's ever said we can only hold water for 3 days. So I would love for if someone from the city of LA can correct me if there's a rule in Los Angeles that says that. But a well-designed storage system, believe it or not, there's no specific limit for how long that water can be safely stored. But I want to answer this question from kind of two angles, because so first of all, I hope you will store your water for longer than 3 days, because that's how you'll get the most use out of it. But if you're not using all of your water, I would recommend draining it every year for the simple purpose of getting that water into the ground and freeing up the capacity to catch more. So for example, even in these drought years, we've started to have long dry patches, even in the winter when we're normally thinking of it as rainy season. So you may fill your barrels up in September, and then or October, and then by January you forgot it ever rained. But you could, if you have a winter garden, please be using that to irrigate your winter garden. And if not, go ahead and release that water when the ground is dry and let it sink in, because that's how we're really going to start to restore our hydrologic cycle. And then the next time it rains, you recharge all the way again. So, what I work mostly with these multi-barrel systems, and I tell people, say you have, even using a series of these 55 gallons, I have over 1,000 gallons of storage capacity, but I save way more than that every year because I'm getting multiple recharges. And with those automatic overflow, I think what I didn't emphasize about those downspout diverters, that overflow feature is automatic. You can be on vacation. You don't have to turn it on and off. It will automatically overflow when your barrels are full. And then anytime you use water, you're automatically going to be refilling them again. So the drawdown and recharge is continual. And again, it would be a topic for another presentation, but if you're able to connect to gravity-fed drip irrigation, it's just perfect, because you get that water distributing to your landscape, you're creating more capacity, and every time it rains, you get a top up. So what I love most about this kind of work is helping kind of see people light up when they start to understand, wow, this is a really functional system that's actually really great for the environment and for my garden.
Great, thank you. Actually, the next question is about drip irrigation. And Jason is asking about the automation of water distribution to the garden using pumps with float valves, timers, drip hoses, or other ideas. So
Yeah.
maybe elaborate a little bit on that, perhaps?
Yes, sure. So what I would say, and you again, I have on our website, we have a lot of free information about gravity fed irrigation. It's one of the major areas of education that we've gotten into as an outgrowth of rain barrels, and that's, you know, accessible to the public for free. If you're doing gravity fed drip, there are a few principles that you want to have your head around, and I'm not prepared with slides to get into detail on that. But you asked specifically about timers, and I just want to mention that you want to make sure you're using a timer that's meant for gravity feed. If you go get a standard, a lot of them look like those little green egg-shaped timers that you can get at a hardware store. Those are meant for pressurized systems, and they actually require pressurized water to close fully. So you'll install it and you'll think it's working, and then you'll go out the next morning and your rain barrels will be drained because it doesn't close. So for gravity fed irrigation, you need a no pressure timer, which means it has a mechanical on and off. Usually they're battery operated. They're simple, they're not terribly expensive. My favorite ones are usually a $40 price point or so. But you can automate your drip cycle. It's usually not, we can't combine potable and non-potable water sources, and we can't combine pressurized and non-pressurized water sources. So if you already have a manifold set up to city water, for example, you can't tap your rain barrel into that. You want to dedicate your rainwater to a portion of your garden that's going to be fed by gravity feed. And you can move the hose when your rain barrels are empty back to a zone, for example, on your manifold that you turn off when you do have rainwater. So there's plenty of ways to do it, but I guess this is a good point to emphasize. We don't want any cross connections between potable, non-potable, and pressurized, non-pressurized. Did that get to, there may have been a piece of that question that.
I think what your answer was sufficient. There was an additional question from Tom about combining gray water systems with rain barrel for irrigation. So
okay, yeah, and actually I probably wouldn't recommend, I don't think there's an easy DIY solution on that. It's probably a system that could be engineered. And maybe this is where the misunderstanding about the 3 days storage came up. Gray water can't be stored, and that's the big difference. If it is stored, some people do have kind of intermediary storage tanks for gray water that they have an automatic, that water has to be cycled out every 24 hours because gray water actually has a lot more stuff in it that will create problems in storage. Rainwater, absolutely not. It's the cleanest water. So I always encourage people, do both, but they're two separate systems. So you could have your laundry to landscape gray water, and you can have your rain barrels collecting off your roof. Both wonderful things to do, but they're sort of like sister techniques rather than something you'd want to combine.
great. Thank you for that. The next set of questions has to do with the use of the water. And you did touch on this, but can you just, Gianna asks if the water is safe to drink and or if it needs treatment. And then Sura is asking about a product called mosquito bits that she places in the containers. And is that appropriate to use on vegetables or on edibles? And then, yeah, so if you want to address just if water can be used for edibles, and if not, is, you know, what needs to be done in order to make it available for
Sure.
edibles, or if
Yeah.
not, if that's
This is a great question. So first of all, I want to draw a distinction, but can you drink the water? No, definitively not. And this is what that little do not drink sticker looks like that you need to put next to each outlet. So I will say people do potable rainwater harvesting. It's wonderful if you're really serious about that, but you're going to be hiring, you know, it's a permitted system, engineered, harder to do in some areas than others. It's not a DIY kind of thing. If you're going to be drinking the water, it absolutely has to be treated, continually tested, and that's a pretty serious process. So that's a different league. I'm going to set that aside. But I do want to note that irrigating edibles is perfectly okay. So if you think about it, a lot of people wonder, a lot of people think that rainwater, you can only irrigate non-edibles, and that's not true. So in a fruiting plant, for example, the water comes up through the plant and it is clean, pure water that gets into that fruit. And that actually the particulates and the kind of bacteria that we see in rainwater is going to condition your soils, and it doesn't penetrate the membranes in something edible. So as always, any produce you eat, even if you buy it from the supermarket, you're going to want to wash it. Absolutely, you need to wash it off. But if any of you are hobby gardeners like I am, you know that those little animals are all in your garden anyway. So whatever they're putting on your roof, they're putting directly into your garden as well. And I have advice on plant pathologists, or from plant pathologists on this as well. A lot of people don't realize too that even, farmers and agricultural operations usually don't irrigate with potable water as it is. They're trench irrigation, things like that. So rainwater is safe for irrigating a vegetable garden, not safe to drink directly.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Our next set of questions is regarding the use of UV resistant paint, and we're getting a lot of questions about what kind of outdoor spray paint could be used. Is there a special UV proof paint that residents should be looking for? And then Kristen wanted to know if there are any other materials besides plastic that can be used for rain barrels.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as the paint, and we've been asked to, this is a public presentation, and we've been asked to stay away from brand names, and particular retailers. So, and the truth is, I don't, a standard hardware store would have, you read the label and you want to make sure it's meant for outdoor use and that it bonds to plastic if you're using a plastic tank. I don't know actually if the paint is going to have labeling that indicates that it's UV resistant, but what you're doing is you're creating opacity. So I want to be clear that painting your barrel is not as good as starting with an opaque barrel. Even if you start with an opaque barrel, you can still paint it if it's the look that you're going for. The paint is sort of a fix for if you have a barrel that's not UV resistant, it's giving you algae problems, it's something you can do, and you might have to repaint it every few years. It's not the perfect solution, but it's something you can do to help that situation. Not most rainwater catchment systems are plastic. HDPE is a food grade material. It's high quality, and it's what our food is shipped in. I don't have experience using the steel drums, and depending on the kind of metal you use, you just want to make sure it's properly coated and enameled, because I would worry about rust and oxidation. You do see with larger cisterns, the stainless steel is a material that's used. And although often I think they're lined with plastic on the inside. Wooden barrels, I've seen DIY setups where people use a wine barrel, and I think that can work for a while. But what I've heard is that they get wet on the inside, and they with the winter to summer, my words are escaping me here, but they expand and contract a little bit, and over time they will break down. So I find, I'm not a proponent of putting more plastic into the universe, but plastic does have its uses. And with, my focus professionally has been on using repurposed barrels for, code compliant designs. So I think if you can be repurposing plastic as you do this, that's a good opportunity as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Jesse. We do have a few low impact development questions, so I'm going to pop these over to Mitesh. One participant asks if there is any requirements, if LID in Los Angeles requires the system for a 3/4 inch rainfall in 24 hours to be drained within 24 hours. And then again, a question about the 3-day rule because of vectors. So I don't know if you want to address that, Mitesh, if there's any requirements in Los Angeles about the draining of rain barrels after within 24 hours.
Sure. Thanks, Joyce. So in terms of draining the rain barrels after a certain amount of time, it depends on if that rain barrel was installed via the permitting process when the construction was happening on that project. If it was, then the property owner was signed and notarized a stormwater covenant that was recorded onto their property. And on that covenant is an operation and maintenance plan that outlines the schedule of when they should drain the rain barrel.
Okay.
And I think in that verbiage, we do require those rain barrels to be drained within 36 to 72 hours after a rain event for that specific vector control issue.
Okay. And then Tom asks about low impact development and why do we have a low impact development ordinance if the city only requires 2 barrels when a roof that is, say, 1,000 square feet could potentially gather up to 400 plus gallons, which means 10 barrels.
Yeah, well, the city has the LID program because we are just following the stormwater permit that's issued by the state water board to each city within the state. So with that stormwater permit, there's outlined specific requirements that we need to implement within the city. So that's why with the city of LA, we started the LID program to implement stormwater mitigations on private developments during that time.
Great. Thank you,
I hope
Mitesh.
that answers.
Great. Thank you, Mitesh. I'm going to answer these questions. Several of our participants wanted to know if we are going to be making this presentation available afterwards. And yes, we are recording this presentation and we will be sending out a copy of this presentation to all of our participants who registered. And you are also welcome to log on to LA Stormwater's YouTube channel. There are quite a few videos about the installation of rain barrels. We did have a few questions about the installation of rain barrels. So you're welcome to log on to LA Stormwater's YouTube channel to learn more about the installation of rain barrels. Let me see, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Let's see. Rose asks, what size barrels would you suggest if you're beginning to harvest rainwater and when you don't have a whole lot of space?
So I think a very standard size is going to be between 50 and 60 gallons. With the DIY ones, those food grade drums are 55 gallons, and the prefab barrels that I've seen are usually between 50 and 60. But remember, and space is a limit for a lot of people. You could consider, even in a narrow side yard corridor, you can really line those up, as you saw in some of the pictures that we showed. So, but I'm always a proponent. You have to fit yourself with a project. So if you're the type of person who likes to start small and then add on, that's one way to approach it. And I encourage that. And then others really want to plan the whole thing and understand the whole thing from start to finish, and then do it in one shot. And that's another way to do it. But a standard rain barrel is going to be between 50 and 60 gallons in size. And you can get, there are other size tanks, odd sizes, 100, 230. So depending on exactly what space you have, you just want to measure before you commit to that tank.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. I think we have time for just 1 more question, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. What is the best way to maintain a multi-barrel system? And maybe this is something that is more complex, but Heidi wanted to know if there are suggestions for maintaining a multi-barrel system where several barrels are connected to each other and you can't separate the barrels.
Yeah. So, I mean, the principles we went over apply no matter whether you're doing a single small barrel, multi-barrel, or a larger tank. Same principles. With a multi-barrel, what you could do, and what I recommend, is usually having a shutoff valve between sets of 2 or so. But that would if you had a problem in part of your system, you could isolate that. So that's how I do it. But in general, it's the same principles no matter how many barrels you have or what size.
Okay, thank you for that. So why don't we go ahead and move to the next slide, please? So just one more reminder, after the webinar, we will have a link to a brief 5-minute survey. We really encourage you to take this survey. And again, City of Los Angeles residents who take the survey will be entered into a random drawing to win a Home Depot gift card. Next slide, please. And so a huge thank you from the City of Los Angeles LA Stormwater Program for your attendance here today. We had a lot of questions that we were not able to get to due to time restraints. If there are some questions that we were not able to answer, we really encourage you to send those questions to LAStormwater@lacity.org, and we will get the answers to those questions. So again, on behalf of LA Sanitation and the environment, thank you so much for being here. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.